Okay, I feel like the light is doing this weird in and out thing, but I'm also not gonna complain because I feel lucky to have any light in January in New England. Right, Zuko? He's so happy. He's been sitting by the sliding glass door all day in the sunlight. Oh my gosh, you were so cute. Don't worry, I will show you this. You are so handsome. Oh, to be a cat basking in the sun. If I'm ever reincarnated, I definitely want to be a spoiled house cat. Anyway, hi, I'm Erin, and I'm going to talk about the 25 books I want to read in 2025. I'm not really someone who tends to make hard and fast TBRs that I have to stick to, so I'm not going to be mad at myself if I don't get to every single one of these books. However, I obviously do want to read as many of them as possible, and all of these are books I am genuinely excited to read. Also, most of these are from my physical TBR just because it's kind of ridiculous that I own and buy so many books, but in 2024 I actually read more library books than books I own. Which is a great thing. I mean, I would be out of house and home if I bought every single book I read. But considering I have so many on my physical TBR, I really do want to tackle that this year. So let's just get straight into it, and if you haven't seen me before, I'm Erin, I'm 24, I live in New England with my boyfriend and our 2 cats. I'll put my obligatory cat talks photos here. This is Mabel and this is Zuko. Obviously, I love to read, but I also love fashion, knitting, baking, and all sorts of other things like that. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it with the first book in no particular order. This is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. Obviously, this is an extremely popular book. It's about a female chemist in the 1960s who also has her own cooking show. Brie Larson stars in the TV show adaptation of this. I also really want to watch that, but I do have to read the book first, obviously. I've basically heard nothing but good things about this book. It's extremely popular, and it's kind of insane that I haven't read it considering I am also a female chemist. Actually, that does bring me to one of the few negative comments I've heard about this book though. I had a coworker of mine, another female chemist, say that you can really tell that the author of this book isn't an actual scientist. Not in the way that she gets any scientific facts wrong, but it's in the way she represents our main character. My friend said it was a little stereotypical and that no actual chemist would talk like that. So I'm curious still. I do love a good historical fiction novel, so I'll be the one to judge. Oh, and none of these books are going to be 2025 new releases because honestly, I don't tend to get to most new releases in the year they actually come out. For some of them, sure, I want to, but I don't even know if I'll read them this year, and that's kind of its own whole list. There are so many good books coming out this year that half of this 25 books I want to read in 2025 would be new releases. And I don't want to focus on that, I want to focus on my backlist. Next, let's dive into 2 books I'm actually currently reading or about to be reading. That would be The God of the Woods by Liz Moore and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. These are very different books. Let's talk about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow first. This is my book club pick, well, one of my book club's picks for January, so I have started it. I'm a whole whopping 12 pages in. This is a realistic fiction book following the 30-year relationship between Sadie and Sam. I don't think it's romantic, but it might be. It also might just be a friendship. This says that Tomorrow and Tomorrow Tomorrow is a dazzling novel that examines the multifarious nature of identity, disability, failure, the redemptive possibilities in play, and above all, our need to connect, to be loved, and to love. I'm pretty sure Sadie and Sam end up creating some video game together and it makes them wildly successful, but then sort of complicates their lives and relationships. I do love a good book about a messy relationship. It's why I liked Normal People so much. This is another one also that has been super well received and has gone viral on Book Talk, so I'm hoping it lives up to all the hype. The God of the Woods I have been eyeing since it came out last year because, I mean, look at this stunning cover. I know this is a library copy, so it's very shiny. But this super cool graphic pink bubblegum drip is so eye-catching. I am also really intrigued by the contents of this book. This is a mystery set in the 70s where 2 children from the same family end up going missing at the summer camp years apart. So I think this is also going to be a bit of a drama as well as a mystery, trying to find out where these 2 siblings went. I love a good mystery, but I do feel like I tend to be pretty judgy and picky with them if they don't really shock me or if I don't believe they're well set up, sometimes that does sort of knock down my rating. Now I have a whole slew of fantasies because fantasy is my favorite genre, but before I get into those, I do have to mention the next one on this list, and please don't judge me. It's The Lord of the Rings / The Hobbit. I have never ever read anything by Tolkien, and as a fantasy lover, that does feel a little bit blasphemous. I have grown up watching the movies. I love them. I can genuinely sit and rewatch the Lord of the Rings trilogy at any time. But for some reason as a kid, I just never felt very drawn to the Lord of the Rings books. And part of that is because there are essentially no female main characters, which kind of sucks, and it's not all that surprising considering when it was written, but especially as a little girl, I just didn't care for that. But I feel like it's my time. I have to at least give it a chance. So I don't know if you have to start with The Hobbit or if you can just go straight into The Lord of the Rings. Maybe I'll just ask my dad. He read those when he was a kid. He is the one who got me into fantasy and all things nerd, to be honest. So he'll definitely know, but also, let me know what you recommend. The next fantasy I want to read is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. I've been a huge Brandon Sanderson fan since I read the Mistborn trilogy when I was in high school, and this is the next book in the Stormlight Archive that I need to tackle. Yes, every single book in this epic, expansive fantasy series is over 1,000 pages, but trust me, it is well worth it. Last year I read The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. They were some of the best books I've ever read. Not just in 2024, but in my entire life. So of course I do want to read book 3, but if I feel really motivated, I might also just finish out the entire series now that it's complete. This is kind of weird about me, and I know some people won't agree, but I don't really like to read series all in one go, even if they're already out and complete. I like to kind of take breathers to really appreciate and mull over what I've read before moving on to the next book. Which ultimately means that I end up starting a million series at once, which I don't find confusing. I know some people would think that's crazy, but another one I want to start is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the Dandelion Dynasty, and I do own all of the books in this series because my boyfriend has read it and he absolutely loves it. Honestly, I don't even know what this series is about. I just know that everyone loves it. I love an epic fantasy, so I have to add this to my list. And speaking of my boyfriend, if you hear any weird noises in the background, he is gaming in the next room. Let's throw a horror into the mix. This is Slewfoot by Brahms. Oh, excuse me, it's Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery. I love that word, bewitchery. Also, this is another one where the cover is just stunning, but this is about witches sort of during the time of the Salem witch trials. We follow a character named Abatha who is widowed and then turns to the spirit in the woods and makes a deal. I'm really intrigued by Puritan colonial times in America because Puritan culture is just so strange. They were all extremely, I would say, paranoid, judgmental, and were encouraged to spy on their neighbors. This book also features art by, I think, the author, and I will take any book with art in it. I just think that is so beautiful. We'll see if I can save this one for Halloween because that would be such a vibe, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to wait. Moving back to fantasy, we have 5 Broken Blades by May Cortland. This is definitely one of the most stunning books I bought last year. Look at those sprayed edges, and yes, the end papers are so beautiful, and the inside naked cover. I love me a beautiful naked book. Anyway, this book is supposed to follow a heist, sort of similar to Six of Crows for adults, is what I've heard. The 5 most dangerous liars in the land have been mysteriously summoned to work together for a single objective: to kill the god King June. That's basically all I need to know. This sounds like such a fun time to me. I love a good heist, and yes, I am, like everybody else, I love Six of Crows. So if this is anything similar to that, I'm sure I'll like it. Another 2024 new release I want to get to is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. M.L. Wong wrote The Sword of Kaigen and self-published it. I haven't yet read that one, but I've heard such good things. I've also seen a lot of people list this one as one of their favorite books from last year. This is a fantasy. It's her first traditionally published book. I think it's also a bit of a dark academia, which I love both of those things, fantasy, dark academia. If you give me a magic school, I'll read it. And that's what we're following. Our main character, I don't know if it's Siona, I'm gonna have to look that up before I read it, but she wants to be the first woman ever admitted to the High Magistracy at the University of Magics and Industry. Wow, that was a mouthful. And again, I clearly like to add more and more fantasy series to my roster. I do like to continue them too, though. This is The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. Last year I read The Shadow of the Gods, which was the first book in this Norse Viking inspired fantasy series, and it was extremely action-packed. We followed 3 different characters, all with different goals. And this is set in a world where all of the gods have died. However, their presence isn't entirely gone. We have monsters, and we also have people with the blood of the gods who exhibit certain powers, but they are ostracized from society. It was bloody, it was grim, I had such a good time, and this is the second book in that series, so I'd really like to get to this in the first half of 2025. Another fantasy sequel would be Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy. I also read the first book last summer and really liked it, however I will say it was quite slow. But because of its slow pace, Robin Hobb was really allowing us to explore the world, its magic, and our main character Fitz. He is the bastard child of the heir to the throne, and his entire existence throws a wrench into everything. His father ends up abdicating, and eventually Fitz is trained to become the next assassin to the royal family. However, there are a lot of political secrets at play and also some forbidden magic that Fitz may or may not have. That first book, I felt so incredibly invested, not only in our world and the magic, but in our main character, so I'm excited to see his journey continue. I don't actually own the next one I want to read, that is Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. This is a realistic fiction book following 3 sisters in the wake of their 4th sister's death. Obviously, all of these sisters each had their own individual struggles and reactions to their sister's death, but they all have to come back together to prevent the sale of their childhood apartment in New York City. And again, this seems like a book about messy relationships. The description says, as the sisters reckon with the disappointments of their childhood and the loss of the only person who held them together, they realize the greatest secrets they've been keeping might not have been from each other, but from themselves. That's all I needed to hear, and Blue Sisters was another new release from last year that I've been eyeing. Next we have not 1, but 2 World War II books. I've already read so many books set during this time period, but I just can't help myself. There's also about 1 million of them. Well, to be fair, I actually think The Alice Network by Kate Quinn is set during World War I and just after World War II. In World War I, we follow a character named Eve. She ends up joining this network of spies called the Alice Network, of course. 30 years later, Eve is living in London and she meets Charlie. Charlie is an American college girl who ends up getting pregnant, and her family sends her to Europe to sort of hide the shame. However, Charlie doesn't care about any of that. She just wants to find out what happened to her beloved cousin Rose. Rose went missing in France during World War II, so Charlie ends up traveling to London and meeting up with Eve to try and find her. I loved The Huntress by Kate Quinn. That was a book set just after World War II and during World War II from one of the perspectives. It was beautifully written and all of the characters were so unique and endearing. So I'm ready to read my second book by her and see what she does with these new characters and this new story. The next one is a fan favorite, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. No, I can't believe I haven't read this either. Everyone raves about this book, and it has like a 4.5 or 6 out of 5 on Goodreads, which is basically impossible. I almost never see that. All I know is this follows 2 sisters who live in France during the German occupation in World War II and the journeys that they go on. People apparently cry. I don't know, I'm not much of a book crier. I'll get sad, I'll tear up, but I don't tend to usually cry. People love Kristen Hanna. I mean, love her. She writes a lot of other historical fiction novels, but I've only ever read 1 book by her, and that was Firefly Lane. But I actually didn't love Firefly Lane. I read it because I watched the TV show, and this was a rare situation where I thought the TV show was better. Alright, our stack has gotten a lot smaller. Let's mention the last historical fiction book, and that is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. I read Rules of Civility by Amor Towles probably 3 years at least at this point, maybe 4, and I haven't picked up one of his other books yet, even though A Gentleman in Moscow is probably his most popular. A Gentleman in Moscow follows Count Alexander Rostov, who is sentenced to house arrest at this hotel in Moscow. So while all these crazy things are happening in Russia's political and historical scheme, he is just watching it through the window. He ends up befriending a lot of people at the hotel, including a young girl he ends up protecting. Next is another chunky fantasy book because I just can't help myself. This is The Will of the Many by James Islington. In this book, we follow an orphan named Viz who lives under the hierarchy. He ends up attending their most prestigious school to learn how to use the magic in this world, which is will. I heard the magic system described as a pyramid scheme, if that makes any sense. However, Viz isn't all that he seems. He is actually attending this school in order to solve a murder, find a magic weapon, and uncover the secrets of the hierarchy. This is another one with almost scarily high ratings on Goodreads, and I will say I am extremely excited, but also maybe a little nervous. I don't know if this one will live up to the hype, if it's going to be as good as everyone says it is. Another one with a lot of hype is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I have not yet read a single book by this author. I know, what have I been doing with my time? I own Babel, I own the first 2 books in the Poppy War series, but I just haven't picked up any of them yet. But this is going to be the year I am not going to go through 2025 without reading at least one R.F. Kuang book. Babel is a standalone fantasy following our main character as he attends this prestigious school of translation and magic, of course called Babel. This power of translation and magic has led to the British Empire's success. However, our main character starts to feel conflicted about contributing to this. That is because our main character is Chinese, although he's grown up in London. So by serving Babel and their goals for the British Empire, he might be betraying his motherland. This is a bit of a dark academia. I'm pretty sure there's also some sort of secret society. I love a good secret society. Everyone scream at me to finally read an R.F. Kuang book. I know, my life will certainly be changed. I made a list of all these books on my phone so I could grab them, and I just realized I put Ruthless Cows instead of Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. Anyway, this is the sequel to Divine Rivals, and since it's a duology, this is actually the last book in this series. I really liked Divine Rivals, but I wasn't obsessed. I feel like we didn't get a lot of information about the magic or the gods. In the first book, Divine Rivals, there is a war between 2 gods and they're recruiting people to their sides. Our main characters, Roman and Iris, are journalists who are writing about the war in their hometown city. There's a bit of a rivalry between them and they end up writing letters to each other with their magical typewriters. There's a lot of romance in the first book, which was honestly one of the cutest things I've ever read, but I wanted more information about the magic and the gods. I'm hoping we'll get more of that in this second book, Ruthless Vows, especially because that first book ended on such a big cliffhanger. Shocker, we have another first book in a fantasy series. This is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is actually a bit of a Sherlock Holmes and Watson style mystery in a fantasy world. We follow Anna, who I think is Sherlock, and Dinios, her Watson, as they try to solve this magical murder of an Imperial officer. Apparently, a tree erupted from his body. Yikes, that sounds incredibly painful. Not the way I'd want to go, that's for sure, but I do love a good mystery and a good fantasy, so having 2 in 1, basically my perfect story. Next, I actually have an oldie but a goodie, and that is Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is the year I want to read Lord of the Rings and also start reading Jim Butcher, 2 of my dad's favorites that I've just never picked up. Anyway, this is a series following a wizard detective in Chicago. And I believe in the first book, he is investigating a murder that he suspects might have been committed by a black mage. So again, magic, murder, my 2 favorite things coming together. I'm really hoping to like this series. Another one I don't own, at least not yet, would be Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I started reading T. Kingfisher last year, finally. She tends to write fantasy and horror, again, 2 of my favorite things, and Nettle and Bone is a fairy tale inspired novel. But I'm talking real fairy tales, like dark, gritty, kind of creepy stuff, not the Sarah J. Maas hot fairies. Mara seeks the help of a grave witch to help her stop the abuse of her sisters at the hands of a prince. Of course, in order to get the tools to kill the prince, she has to complete 3 impossible tasks because this is a fairy tale. It says that on her quest she's joined by the Grave Witch, a reluctant fairy godmother, a strapping former knight, and a chicken possessed by a demon, which is something that particularly intrigues me. I love the way T. Kingfisher writes. She has this skill at balancing a little bit of humor with things that are truly dark and terrifying. And now we have come to the final 3, starting with The Wild Huntress by Emily Lloyd Jones. This is actually a YA book, and I don't tend to read a ton of YA anymore, but when it's good, it's good. I think this is inspired by Welsh mythology, and it follows 3 characters participating in a wild hunt. If they win, they get 1 wish granted by the other king. I love anything inspired by Welsh mythology and anything with a sprinkling of fairy tale. Actually, one of my favorite fun facts is that in some mythologies in the UK, fairies were said to ride into battle on the backs of corgis. Can you just picture that? That is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. We have Jade City by Fonda Lee, another fantasy series I want to start. This is the first book in a trilogy. This is supposed to be kind of like The Godfather with magic, where there are warring families all fighting over jade, which is what fuels magic in this world. I'm always cool with some unique magic systems in a clan war, plus again, I've heard nothing but good things about this entire series. And last but not least, we have The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. I guess this is another historical fiction in my list I didn't mention earlier, but this is set way back in Pompeii. I've been obsessed with the ancient world since I read Percy Jackson as a kid, I think like all the rest of us. So yeah, I am a sucker for all of these mythological retellings like Circe in the Song of Achilles, but this one I don't believe is a mythological retelling. It's just a historical fiction following a prostitute at the Wolf Den in Pompeii. I'm so curious about using Pompeii as a setting for this book, not only because of the eruption of Vesuvius, but because Pompeii is basically the most well-preserved ancient city we have from ancient Rome. And that is because of Vesuvius, because of all the ash and the pyroclastic flows. That is what preserved the architecture and the casts of the bodies. Okay, so there we have it. That would be 25 books I hope to get to in 2025. Again, if I don't, I'm not gonna hold it against myself. There's so many other books. I have the longest TBR, not to mention the new releases. But these are all truly books I am desperate to read. I just wish I had more time, but you know, that whole 9 to 5 thing really cramps my style and gets in the way of my reading time. Anyway, I want to know what books you want to read in 2025, and if you've read any of these and liked them or didn't like them, let me know.